Hey there, we're back with another video devotional, and this time we're going to talk from the book of Job, chapter 2, verses 9 and 10. Job, chapter 2, verses 9 and 10. And this video is in honor of April Fool's Day. April Fool's Day. Today is April Fool's Day, and so it's April 1st, and so just doing a devotional on being foolish or not foolish. And I want to sort of title this devotional, Don't Be a Fool. Okay, so what's a fool in the Bible? Well, we know from Psalm 14:1 that a fool is a person who says in their heart that there is no God. You remember the story of Job. Job had gone through an unbelievable amount of trauma. His 10 children had died. All of his wealth had been taken away from him. And in chapter 2, Satan comes to God and says, well, you've taken all these things from him, but you haven't touched his body. If you touch his body, he'll curse you. And so God allows Satan to affect his body, and Job ends up scraping the sores from his boils and sitting in the ashes to try to clean himself. Unbelievably painful picture of suffering. And in that moment, when everything is so difficult, his wife comes to him and essentially tells him that he should stop trusting God. If you look at verse 9, it says, then his wife said to him, do you still hold fast your integrity? Curse God and die. In this moment of suffering, she's obviously lost her children as well. She's lost everything that she owns. There's no wealth left. All of her children are dead, and her husband is about to die, she thinks, because of this illness that he's evidently suffering. And so in this moment, when everything has been taken away from her, she comes to him and she says, we shouldn't trust God anymore, and her faith is broken. Whether she's a believer or not, we don't know. This is the only time that she really interacts with him. Job, though, gives her a reply, and it's actually a very tender reply in many ways. He says, you speak as one of the foolish women speaks. No, when you first read that, you're like, I think he just called her a fool. That's not that tender. But it's actually an amazingly tender thing, because he doesn't say you are a fool. He doesn't say you're being a fool. He says you're speaking as a fool would speak. In other words, what he's saying is the words that you're saying are the words of a person who is foolish. And as I said, a fool in the Hebrew context is a person who is not acknowledging God, right? The fool has said in his heart there is no God. At this moment, when she is in this midst of intense suffering and her husband is about to die, or she believes that her husband is about to die, she speaks like an atheist. She looks into the world and she says there's so much difficulty and so much trouble and so much trauma. God must not exist, and if he does exist, he's not good, and therefore we should just curse him and eliminate all of this from our lives. That's her response to the suffering. And Job's response to her is, listen, don't be an atheist. Don't forget that God is who he still says he is. And then his sentence finishes at the end there. He says, shall we indeed accept good from God and not accept adversity? His answer to her is actually a remarkable answer. He tells her, listen, and actually in the Hebrew it's very clear, good shall we receive from God, and evil shall we not receive. In other words, we take the good from God and we receive it from him, and we with our hearts should give gratitude to him for the good things that he's given us. But when difficulty and adversity comes into our lives, so often it's easy for us to not receive those things as coming from his hand. And that's really so important, because that when we start to think of evil things as not coming to us, or difficult things as not coming to us from God's hand, what happens? We start to live lives of practical atheism. And that's really what Job is telling her. Listen, remember that God is in control. In all of these difficulties and all of these hardships, much, much greater than what most of us are facing, even in this time of sort of complexity and hardship in our country, in all of the difficulties and hardships that Job faced, he said, listen, let's not live like practical atheists. We don't want to be foolish and say that there is no God. No, God is in control, and he's given us the good, but he's also at this moment giving us the adversity, and we must receive these things from his hand. And the answer for that really is that God is good, right? If God is good, then even the most difficult and painful things in life must be coming from his hand, and therefore must be good. Now, Job struggled with these things, and the rest of the book is Job really unfolding what he feels is clearly his righteousness, which he was a righteous man, in the presence of so much suffering. And at the end of the day, God's answer for Job is not to give him an answer for why all of this happened. God's answer to Job is, your responsibility is to worship me. And if you know me, then that is the best thing, much better than any good that you can receive from the world. God's answer for Job at the end of the day, at the end of the book, is, you know me, and if you know me, then even if you lose everything else, you have everything. And that's really what we need to believe right now in this season of life and in our country. If we know God, if we have Him, if we have Christ, then even if we lose everything else, it is enough for us that we know Him and that He loves us. So then that helps us. That helps us to receive not only the good from His hand, but also the adversity. Well, thanks.